In this video, I will share 8 fundamentals of filmmaking that took me way too long to learn. 8 fundamentals that not only make our documentaries better, but our jobs easier. For each, I'll go over why it matters, why it took me so long to learn, and how you can avoid making the same mistakes that I did. If you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer, and even though I was missing the following 8 fundamentals for far too long, I've still been fortunate enough to work as a video journalist and documentary filmmaker for the past 10 years with outlets such as the New York Times, National Geographic, Hulu, HBO, and more. The first fundamental that took me way too many years to add into my filmmaking practice is to use the little bubble on the back of my tripod to level the camera. Okay, this is why it took me so long to learn this. So my first tripod that I purchased was this tripod from Manfrotto, and it's the 504 HD head, and it has this little tiny bubble in there. It's so small and it's so hard to get into the middle of the leveling circle, and the light that illuminates it, if it's at all dark, always would turn off and just not function properly. And so at some point, using the little bubble on my tripod became such a hassle that I just ditched it altogether. And I thought, you know what? When it comes to the level horizon my camera sees, I'm just gonna use the little leveler in the display field of my camera. However, then years later, I was on a documentary shoot and I was having to use a tripod a lot for this shoot. And at that point, I started using the Sachtler Flowtech tripod, which I've talked about here on the channel many times. And this one has a bigger bubble. It has a light that always illuminates it so I can see what I'm doing. And so I had this nice bubble, this nice tripod, but I still wasn't using the bubble to level my horizon. Again, just using the camera. But then I was working on this documentary and I was using the tripod a lot and had to do a lot of pans. And the documentary aesthetic was just very much on sticks. And what I started to notice was when I would start doing pans on this tripod, even though when I started the shot, it looked like everything was level, by the end of the shot, everything was wonky. Like my horizon levels was just so far off. And that's because I actually didn't have a stable and even head on the tripod. I had it for a moment on the camera, but then not when I pan to one side, the horizon would get all out of shape. And so that's when I asked another cinematographer I was working with, I'm like, wait, what, am I doing something wrong? Am I missing something? And that's when he told me, you need to start using the bubble. So now what I do anytime I'm setting up my tripod is I go immediately to look at that bubble, get it placed right in the middle of the circle to make sure I'm level. And then not only is it for that current frame that I'm looking at, making sure that horizon line is level right then, but it also gives me the flexibility if I'm gonna be following action on a tripod while filming a documentary. If I need to do a quick pan to someone that just walked into the room, or if I need to reveal something over here, or even when I'm, tilting up and down, when I need to follow action on a tripod, I can trust that if I go from my static shot, if my level horizon and my bubble's squared, then no matter where I'm gonna turn, I'm gonna continue to have a nice looking horizon leveled frame. And so that one is one who take me way too long to figure out and add to my practice. The second fundamental that took me way too long to learn has to do with audio. So this is the model of the very first microphone that I ever bought and that I ever owned. And this is the video mic, the Rode video mic. This particular one I think is the second version I had. This is the Rode Video Mic Pro Plus. I think I had the Video Mic Pro before this one. And this lived back in the day on my Sony a7S II. This was my main shotgun mic on camera for many years. And what I was doing while shooting was I would shoot with this windscreen or should I say, windscreen, because the second fundamental that I ignored for way too long is to actually use a legitimate windscreen. Some people call these dead cats, but as an animal advocate, I don't call them a dead cat. I call them a windscreen or a fuzzy or a softie. This one is from Rode, which fit the Video Mic Pro Plus perfectly. I had to order it. But even on shotgun mics that I use now, so this is one that I use sometimes when I'm doing radio pieces, the one I have above me right here on the Sennheiser, I have a right coat softie for both of those. And so these right coat softies essentially live on these microphones. I pretty much am never using something that looks like this. I always have them in these more robust windscreens. And I think the reason why it took me so long to embrace using legit windscreens is because camera gear is expensive. And expensive, this was probably a couple $100. Now the Sennheiser 8060 mic that I use is over $1,000. And I think when I purchased that piece of equipment, I'm not always so excited to throw another item in the cart in the form of a windscreen to add onto the mic. And so I think I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna get the mic. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna do a great job. But inevitably what would happen is I would be out on a windy day and suddenly I would just get so much of that wind distortion in my audio and it would just make it unusable. And then I have a microphone that I spent a bunch of money on, but then I got cheap when it came to adding that little extra protection for my audio. I didn't go that one extra step to just ensure that the quality of that audio is going to be good. And as we know, audio is so incredibly important for documentary films. And so eventually I started to get on the legit windscreen train. And so this is the second fundamental that I finally embraced after way too many years. The third fundamental is one that I would say I'm still learning or still becoming more disciplined about. And this is because it's kind of like a producer role in a sense. But if you are like me and you often are working solo as a one man or woman team out in the field, you have to be your own producer. So what the fundamental is essentially getting people to sign release forms. Release forms started to become something that I was thinking more about after doing a story for Insider's News and Documentary team about wildfires here in California. I had been following a particular character in this film for a number of months. He had given the team permission to tell his story. We filmed for a while, and then right before we were about to publish this story online, that participant said, actually, no, I don't want to be a part of it anymore. This posed a really interesting kind of ethical dilemma for the team and for this whole entire story, which is kind of another story. But I was then asked, okay, do you have a release form? Do you have something that this person has signed to indicate that they had given you permission over these months? And I didn't have that release form. And I think that's because I had always been someone who is like let me just ask for forgiveness after the fact kind of person. But when it comes to doing journalistic pieces, doing documentary pieces, what I have learned is it's best to get people to sign as early as possible so we have that insurance policy. We have that guarantee that we can film this and there's not going to be this huge debate both ethically and legally down the road when someone says, oh, actually, wait, I never gave you permission. So nowadays, I will either bring a hard copy release form with a little clipboard. I'll ask people to sign it when I film, just at the beginning of a filming day. Or more often than not, I'm actually using digital release forms when I am out on set. And so I'm going to put the name of the apps that I use down in the description of the video because I can't remember them right now. But those are a couple apps to check out if you're interested in using digital release forms, which can be easier, faster, and you can also take photos of people when you're getting them to sign so that later, many months down the road, if you're filming with a bunch of people and need a bunch of release forms signed, you can match who the release form is to who they were on camera if you don't remember. All right, the fourth fundamental that took me a while to learn was how useful a fast lens is, how useful a solid prime lens is in your kit. And this is one that I didn't learn because, again, I'm not someone who likes to spend a ton of money on gear. So when I had, a couple solid lenses in my kit, a 24-70, a 70-200, a 24-105, those are all in the kind of the f2.8 to f4 range. I was like, I've spent enough on lenses. I have enough focal range. I'm good to go. But then I ended up working on a documentary called Dear Santa for Hulu and ABC. And I was challenged with setting up interviews in some really challenging environments, some really small spaces, and doing my own art design for the backdrop of those interviews in a very small crew. And what I realized in that moment was just how useful it is to have a lens like this 50 millimeter prime from Sigma. This is a f1.4. The difference between that 2.8 and that 1.4 aperture, it just gave me a lot more flexibility with how I was framing interviews, with how visually interesting and aesthetic the background needed to be able to come away with an image that would be good enough for a Hulu production. And when I was on these shoots, the first times I was there, I didn't have a prime lens yet. And I came away from those being like, okay, you know what? I need a faster lens because I'm going to be getting into basements and offices and just places where having that extra just blurry bokeh background is just going to be helpful for me because I'm needing to do so many of these types of interview setups on the documentaries I work on. And that's when I got this 50 millimeter prime from Sigma. I very much recommend it. So that is another fundamental that I finally learned. The next one on this list, I would say, is I learned finally, after too long, to embrace the dark side. What do I mean by that? When I was going through journalism school back at Stanford University in 2015, we were learning the basics of production, the basics of being a run and gun video journalist, where we're coming into environments we never had the opportunity to pre-scout. We got to get something, we got to get in, we got to get out. And during that time, I was trained to really use window light as a big key light for when I was interviewing or doing stand-ups with my interview participants. And I was told to just, get somebody right, straight looking towards the window. And so you have like illuminated, their face illuminated, you can see them clearly, boom, 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 which is fine. And I think that works great if you are early in your career working as a video journalist and you just are focused on like story and like getting things in the can. But when I started to work as a documentary cinematographer, this kind of look, this flat image just doesn't do it. It's not cinematic enough. It doesn't look like it has the dimension that we look for in documentary film. And that's why I had to learn how to embrace the dark side, to backlight people, to shoot from the shadow side. And so I'm gonna show an example right here of an interview I filmed with an NFL football player that is showing the former. So this is an example of kind of flat light. Again, got the interview. It was just me on set here today, so I got to focus on story, not worry too much about lighting, but there's no dimension there. Now, here is an example of one that actually has some dimension. There's shadows, and it just looks much more cinematic. And this took me a while to learn, but it's one that I'm now very grateful to have as my go-to for the way that I see shape, that I see light when I am filming. All right, next on the list, we're gonna jump into the editing software here to go over a fundamental that's helped me stay organized and help me not lose track of previous versions of edits that I may want to go back to for one reason or another. So we're gonna dive in here to this project that I've been working on for the New York Stock Exchange, in which we interviewed tech entrepreneurs at an event in Colorado. And I wanna draw your attention over here to my bin, which is called sequences. Now, what often will happen, and what I used to do, is we work on a rough draft of something like you'll see in this sequence here. And at some point we'll get edits from the client, or we'll want to make a bunch of edits or try something new. And then we'll just go straight in here into the editing software and start cutting everything up, only to realize, 6 hours later that, actually, that really isn't working. I wish I could go back to what I have. But you didn't really save that version of your work. And so what I do is I am constantly in the habit of duplicating my sequences. So what you'll see right here is I name my sequence with the date of today's date when I'm working on it. And then the next day, if I'm gonna come back in and start editing again, what I'll do is I'll go like this. I'll right click down on here on that sequence, I'll duplicate it, and then I will change the name to the date like that. And then I'll pull up that one, and then essentially I won't touch the one from, in this case, August 28th. I won't touch it again. I'll just go onto this one, and then the next day I'll duplicate again, and then the next day I'll duplicate again. And this is a way that I can always kind of return to previous drafts if I need to kind of see ideas, see how things panned out, if I need to pull something from over there into the new draft. And it's a way to stay organized as I make my way through the edit. The seventh fundamental that took me a while to learn, and this is a challenging one, but I think it's so important when you're moving into the world of documentary film and higher end documentaries. It's not just to create a story using kind of sound bites plus B-roll. It's to actually film scenes. It's to film scenes where the action takes place, where you're seeing and you're showing as the filmmaker rather than telling the audience something. So I'm gonna give you a short example here from one of the first films where I felt like I actually did this successfully back in 2018, called The Carpenter. This short film called The Carpenter follows a man named David Miti, who is a carpenter who works at a children's hospital in Lusaka, Zambia, hand making devices for kids with disabilities. And one of the unique parts about this story is that David Miti himself is a double amputee with no legs. So in this example, you're gonna see a quick example of that audio layer from the interview with B-roll on top. And then you're also going to see a quick scene that illustrates the work that he does as a carpenter at this hospital.
From 8 to 16:30, making some crutches, some braces, special chairs, and then standing frames, devices for children with disabilities.
So right there, you have the quotes from his interview, what he does, how he spends his day. I essentially asked him in the interview, how do you spend your day? Describe it to me. And then I filmed his day and matched the parts of his day that matched to what he said in the interview. Now, right here is a little bit different flavor. This is the actual scene where I strip away, the interview audio and B-roll, and we're just there with him doing his work, interacting with the youth at this facility.
utazivira ile mpaka leo kupola kwa kaenda because bad body itaonongeka kali mwana.
So there you see the difference in those kind of two styles. And documentaries are often a mix of both. But when I worked on this project back in 2018, I remember this felt like an unlock because I felt like this tiny little scene was so much more powerful at illustrating who he was as a person, what his days looked like, and connecting him and what he does as a carpenter to the youth that he helps care for. And the last fundamental that took me far too long to learn is that the audience is smart. You don't have to spell out everything for the audience. I learned this lesson back in 2018 when I was working on a documentary film grant from the National Geographic Society telling a story about maternal health in sub-Saharan Africa. This particular project was set in Zambia. And when I did my first pass of this film in terms of production, gathering all my material and kind of seeing how this thing would take shape, I did so many interviews. I interviewed health experts, doctors, maternal health care workers, community health workers, all about the issues. What's going on? What are people not talking about? What are the issues? But then when I did a test screening after months in the edit, I realized that it was just too much information. I was just trying to shove so much down the throat of my audience that people came away with like, whoa, what just happened? I threw so much at them, trying to just like tell them what I want them to know, that they came away not actually hearing or believing or knowing anything. And so that's when I decided to strip out almost all of the expert interviews and just let the story speak for itself. Instead of having a health expert talk about the lack of resources that mothers have in a rural health clinic, instead of that, I just showed my main character in the rural health clinic. The audience can tell from that, clearly they don't have many resources. And when I did a screening of the film that way and started to actually get so much more response and people leaning in to the story I was telling, that's when it really clicked for me. Okay, the audience can figure it out. You don't have to spell out everything for them. Trust that they're with you and trust their intelligence. All right, I hope you got value from this video and that it helps you not make the same mistakes that I have in my career. I will see you next week on the channel where we'll be discussing filmmaking trends and hype that you really should be ignoring. Until then, go out and tell some stories.